Welcome to my World History Notes, where I read from the book that I wrote to teach homeschoolers world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. You won't agree with my conclusions from the perspective of, say, a Hindu or an atheist or a Muslim or Roman Catholic or some other Protestant faith, but you should know about the subjects that I talk about. I'm going to begin, and we're back on the topic of exploration and conquest. Um, After talking about the slave trade briefly. So the slave trade went hand in hand with the lust for, oh, by the way, you can get my book on lulu.com, amazon.com, or at the Bible Baptist bookstore. Just follow me here. Okay, the slave trade went hand in hand with the lust for gold, which the Spanish enjoyed in the Americas, and the thirst for exploration and conquest everywhere. The Portuguese fleet appeared at Calicut on the Indian Ocean in 1500 after Vasco da Gama had rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1498. Between 1500 and 1505, the Portuguese established trading posts along the west coast of India. Francisco de Almeida was appointed first viceroy of Portuguese India in 1505, also establishing bases along the east coast of Africa. His son Lorenzo established a base on Ceylon, now called Sri Lanka. Alfonso de Albuquerque was appointed viceroy of India in 1507. In 1508, Sultan Mahmud Bagarha of Gujarat allied with Kansu al Ghari of Egypt to try to halt the Portuguese interference with what had been a Muslim monopoly and fought the naval battle of Dabul against them, resulting in Lorenzo being killed. Excuse me. His father gained revenge in 1509 by burning a number of Muslim ports along the India's coast, including Goa and Dabul. Almeida destroyed the Muslim fleet at the Battle of Dayu in 1509. The Portuguese not only built valuable trading posts on the east coast of Africa and the west coast of India, but they moved on to Canton, China in 1514, Burma by 1519, and the Portuguese were in Peking, China by 1520, but were expelled from the capital due to some misbehavior by their ships on the coast of China. In the meanwhile, the Spanish were conquering all of South and Central America and much of North America, with the explorer Coronado in 1540 to 42 conquering New Mexico while he looked for fabled seven cities of gold, and is the first European to see the Grand Canyon that we know of. St. Augustine, Florida, was founded by the Spanish in 1565 after they massacred a French colony on the St. Johns River. Present day California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas would also belong to Spain. This is the time that Francisco Pizarro conquered the Incas of Peru and Chile. Between 1540 and 1561, Chile was conquered by Pedro de Valdivia and Garcia Hutardo de Mendoza. Spain took tons and tons of gold from the Americas during this period. So much wealth and riches were being removed from the New World to Spain that the English, quote, sea dog, Captain Francis Drake and his ship, the Golden Hind, snared more than 10 tons of gold from captured Spanish ships in just 2 years, from 1577 to 1579. Spain spent their fabulous wealth as soon as they got it. For instance, Peter Bernstein's The Power of Gold tells us that Charles V in 1516 became Holy Roman Emperor by being voted in by the Pope's German electors at a cost to Spain of 850,000 florins, a huge fortune, and further bankrupted Spain by 27 years of constant warfare with Francis I of France, plus trying to claim the Netherlands as the property of Spain. Conquest can be quite expensive. In any event, the name America appears on a map for the first time in 1507. There was a Reuters news agency article uh, about 20 years ago about how this map was a puzzle for researchers, because the only surviving 500-year-old map that first used name of America um, is called the Waldseemüller map. Um, you know, he like labeled everything America, and he drew South America very accurately. He put a huge ocean west of America years before European explorers discovered the Pacific. It's kind of a big question for people. The Library of Congress made notes about it. There's 12 sheets that make up the map, and they wonder, well, if what we believe about what they supposedly knew in the past is true, um, then how did they have all this accurate information? It sort of reminds you of the Paris-Ries map, whether it's accurate or not, or whether it's a fraud or not, that outlines the land mass of Antarctica, underneath the ice. So it's very troubling for historical researchers. I mean, it gives this Waldseemüller map gives a reasonably correct description of the west coast of South America. But Balboa didn't reach the Pacific until 1513. So this is several years before that. Magellan didn't round the southern tip of the continent until 1520. So you get this map before that. Supposedly, the map maker said that it was based on 1,300-year-old works of the Egyptian geographer Ptolemy, as well as the letters Florentine navigator Amerigo Vespucci wrote describing his voyages to the New World. But there had to be more, although maybe the ancient Greeks, the Egyptians and Greeks, did more travel than we thought they did. Um, in any event, it is a very interesting map, the 1507 map, because the 1516 Mariners map goes doesn't call things America, labels things New World, and North America is labeled Land of Cuba and Terra Incognita, and things like that. So he goes backwards, like no one knows why it starts out being very accurate and then goes backwards and is not accurate, connects the American continents to the mainland of Asia, things like that. So, a lot of politics could have been involved between Spain and Portugal. There's just a lot of interesting information. So, in any event, let's go back to the historical record here. It's a Wald C. Mueller map. You might want to look it up. And in 1513, Ponce de Leon explores Florida. Vasco Nunez de Balboa travels through Panama in 1513, becomes the first European to see the Pacific Ocean from the Americas in 15 that we know of. Obviously, there's a question there. In 1517, Francisco Fernandez de Cordoba explores the Mayan ruins of the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. We've already discussed Hernando Cortez adventures attempt to cheat land against the Aztecs. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese working for Spain, leaves on an attempt to circumnavigate the globe. He dies fighting the natives in 1521 in what was later to be called the Philippines. In 1524, Italian navigator Giovanni de Verrazzano, working for France, enters what we now call New York Harbor. In 1541, Hernando de Soto leads the first Europeans to see the Mississippi River. In 1606, Luis Valles de Torres sails around New Guinea. Exploration was now the sole province of the Spanish and Portuguese, as in 1553, the English mariner Richard Chancellor opens up a northeastern sea route. Sorry, exploration was not now the sole province of the Spanish and Portuguese, as Richard Chancellor opens up a northeastern sea route to Russia. In 1576, Martin Frobisher rediscovers Greenland for the English. During an expedition in 1577 to 1580, Francis Drake circumnavigates the globe for the first time since Magellan's expedition in 1522. In the process, he sails up California as far as San Francisco Bay. In 1610, English navigator Henry Hudson, trying to find the Northwest Passage to India, instead finds landlocked Hudson Bay. The great American historian of the 19th century, George Bancroft, tells in his epic, The History of the United States of America from the Discovery of the Continent, of how the English colonized Virginia at Jamestown. Then a group of men, including adventurer John Smith, petitioned James I of England to set up a colony in Virginia. King James I agreed on April 10, 1606, the first colonial charter under which the English established their claim to the New World was signed. The Jamestown colonists were not prepared for what they had to face and would have hardly survived had it not been for the help of kindly Indians. The term Indians, by the way, was mistakenly given to these people, first discovered by the Spanish, thinking, or hoping rather, that they had indeed arrived in the Indies, or rather South and Southeast Asia, later called the East Indies, with the Caribbean being called the West Indies. A group of people we call the Pilgrims, journeying on a ship called the Mayflower, landed at a place they called Plymouth in New England, praying to enjoy the religious liberty they had been denied in England. Due to close ties to the Reformation struggles that the English colonies in North America had, we'll discuss some important characters of these areas of English settlement in a short time. It's important for the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims had no intention of conquering anything, so they weren't villains. They were desperate refugees. It was the people that came after them that conquered the area that they lived in. So we can celebrate Thanksgiving without thinking in terms of it being genocide and racial exploitation and conquest, because it was just simply a bunch of people who were uh, desperate, who were helped by the local people that were already here. In 615, French explorer Samuel de Champlain reaches the eastward extension of Lake Huron called Georgian Bay, becoming the first European to see the Great Lakes. It now becomes time to consolidate and try to exploit the territories that have been taken. Tobacco, chocolate, sweet potatoes, peanuts, and vanilla have been brought back to Europe from the New World. In 1644, Dutch explorer Abel Tasman becomes the first European to discover the continent of Australia. We're going to now go to an important time of history called the Renaissance. I didn't want to ignore it, and but I did want to put it in a perspective here, so in a context. So let's go back to the Renaissance next. And I thank you for listening and watching. I hope you study world history and come to your own conclusions.